It's a great honor to be testifying here at this hearing on behalf of Russia's indigenous activists. My research focuses on the impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine on the indigenous people of Russia's North, Far East, and Siberia. From the very first days of the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine, it has been reported that Russia's ethnic minorities are overrepresented, both in the invasion forces and among the Russian side casualties. If we look at the top 10 Russia's regions by per capita death toll, we'll see that 7 out of 10 are ethnic republics or okrugs, with the Asian republics of Tuva, Buryatia, and Altai at the very top of the list. The indigenous ethnic groups living in those regions are very significantly overrepresented among the Russian side war casualties, with Telengids living in Altai showing 11.5 times greater per capita death toll compared to Russia's average. The small-numbered indigenous peoples of the North, Siberia, and Far East, such as Telengids, Udegen, Ganasan, and Chukchi, are hit the hardest. The per capita death toll for those ethnic groups being much higher than even for Buryats or Tuvans. For instance, Nenets living in Nenets Autonomous Okrug, one of the most economically prosperous regions of Russia, don't benefit at all from the booming extractive industry there. Instead, it destroys the environment, threatening their traditional way of living. Nenets are very significantly overrepresented among the region's war casualties, as well as among those who were specifically recruited from prisons. In September 2002, Vladimir Putin announced partial mobilization in Russia. The indigenous rights activist organizations such as Free Buryatia Foundation, Free Yakutia Foundation, Batani Indigenous Foundation received multiple reports of disproportionate draft of indigenous men. Official documents show that Buryatia, my home region, was hit disproportionately hard by the mobilization. In Khabarovsk Krai and Republic of Sakha-Yakutia, the small-numbered indigenous peoples of the north were drafted more often than the rest of each region's population. In Khabarovsk Krai, the indigenous men were drafted almost 3 times more often than non-indigenous population. According to the Batani Foundation, in one Nanai settlement, the authorities attempted to draft 100% of adult male population. In the Udege settlement of Gwasyugi, they drafted 30% of adult men. Thus, whole indigenous cultures are at risk of disappearing within the next several decades. Russian legislation, ostensibly meant to exempt small-numbered indigenous peoples from the mandatory military service, totally fails to protect them. The fact that indigenous people of Russia's North, Far East, and Siberia are overrepresented in the Russian invasion army has led to the formation of the warlike, bloodthirsty, savage stereotype against the indigenous people, most notably against the Buryats, Tuvans, and the Nenets. Apparently, not just the death toll, but also the moral burden of Russia's aggression against Ukraine was put disproportionately on the indigenous people. Unfortunately, such prominent public figures as Pope Francis, the head of the Catholic Church, started spreading this narrative, making the indigenous people a potential target for hate crimes, especially given that some of us live in Ukraine or in other countries abroad. There were a number of the war crime allegations against the indigenous troops, which turned out to be false, most notably about the Bucha massacre, which was falsely blamed on the ethnic Buryat troops. However, it has been established beyond any reasonable doubt that it was the paratroopers from the Russian city of Pskov, almost exclusively ethnic Russians, who were responsible for the Bucha massacre. However, the Buryats in Bucha myth still persists among the anti-war Russian public, as well as in Ukraine and in the West. I think that for the Russian anti-war influencers, the motivation is obviously the desire to shift the responsibility away from the Russians. According to the recent study by Dr. Adam Lenton of the Wake Forest University, the Russian public opposed to Putin's regime and sympathetic to liberal views tends to be significantly more xenophobic towards Russia's ethnic minorities than the society in general. This is a very alarming result, posing a question whether the possible regime change would bring a better future for Russia's indigenous peoples. In conclusion, let's not forget that there are more than 240 indigenous political prisoners in Russia. Please spread the message that in any future prisoner exchanges with Russia, they should not be overlooked. Thank you for your attention.